Please consider for a moment a tribute to the ones who quietly ache in full rooms, who feel like strangers in their own lives, rehearsing the right words for conversations that never quite land. This is the story of Elise, who wandered the edges of connection until an old mirror in a forgotten shop showed her not what she was, but what she believed herself to be. Elise had always been polite. Polite when her ideas were overlooked in meetings. Polite when texts went unanswered, when invitations were lost, when laughter bloomed in circles just beyond her reach. Polite when clients cut her short, when friends rescheduled endlessly, when lovers turned to strangers without ceremony. She lived in a world that rarely met her halfway, and so she stopped walking toward it. Instead, she watched, quietly, from behind a practiced smile. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. It was something quieter, more difficult to name. Like being present in a photograph where no one quite sees you. One afternoon, the city grayed under a drizzle that blurred windows and faces alike. Elise ducked into a narrow shop she'd never noticed before, pressed between a tailor and a tax office. It smelled of time, dust, wood polish, forgotten things. She wandered aimlessly, fingers brushing porcelain, brass, and books with brittle spines, until she stopped. At the far end of the room, tucked beneath a staircase, stood a tall antique mirror. Its glass was foxed with age, its frame a swirl of silver ivy. There was nothing remarkable about it, and yet she stared. Not at her reflection, but at the space around it, the way the mirror seemed to shimmer, ever so slightly, as if the light it held was older than the room itself. She left with it. The price tag was blank. The man behind the counter didn't speak. He simply nodded and wrapped it gently. At home, she placed it in the hallway, between her bedroom and the world. For days it stood untouched, but one evening something strange happened. She had just returned from a client meeting, one where her ideas were again politely dismissed. She had smiled, nodded, folded herself smaller, and now, as she passed the mirror, she paused. There, in the glass, was her reflection, but somehow delayed. Her hand lifted, and the image followed, just a breath behind, as if it had been somewhere else entirely. And then, just for a second, she saw it. Not her face, but her posture, her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She looked suspicious of herself, like someone perpetually preparing for rejection. And suddenly the last few weeks shimmered in her memory. The friend who interrupted her mid-story, the coworker who never replied to her email, the man on the train who turned away, just as she looked up. None of them had done anything cruel, but each had met her with a subtle kind of distance, a distance she now realized she carried first. She sat in front of the mirror that night, no lights, no distractions, and watched, not her face, but her expectation. She began to see the invisible layers of her life, how every interaction bent to the shape of what she already believed, that people would dismiss her, that she didn't belong, that something in her presence repelled warmth. The mirror showed her not how others saw her, but how she saw herself, and more importantly, how the world, ever so loyally, mirrored it back. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. She didn't recite affirmations, didn't force new thoughts. She simply noticed. The clench in her stomach when someone looked her way, the way she braced before speaking, as though preparing for dismissal. And then she softened. She smiled first. She expected kindness, not out of delusion, but curiosity. She imagined, just once, that maybe she was already enough. And slowly, like the first warm current in a long winter, the world responded. A stranger complimented her scarf. Her colleague asked her opinion twice in one meeting. A friend who once seemed distant lingered longer on the phone. No fireworks, no grand awakenings, just mirrors, shifting. Elise still passes that tall mirror each morning. But now she doesn't look for her reflection. She listens for the silence behind it, the place where belief becomes form, and sometimes, just sometimes, the glass seems to nod. Where we find once more that moment in awareness, when the illusion flickers and the ego fades.